All right, so once again, welcome to the Inner Hour for this week. Happy you could join us. And um, so I'm doing another theme set of readings tonight, some from the Bible, some from not in the Bible. And the theme is the beloved. So before I do the readings, I'm going to take a sip of water, but I want to share something with you before I do the reading. So first, for those in the area, Michael and I are doing another one of our classes tomorrow morning at Unity at 10 o'clock, 10 to 12. And you're welcome to join us, even if you haven't signed up, but you can get there. You're welcome to show up. The other thing I want to mention is that this theme of the beloved is in quite a bit of spiritual literature, including some traditional fundamentalist type literature in the Jewish, Christian, Hindu, and Buddhist traditions, probably more, but the ones that I know of. And then in Eastern poetry, mostly Persian, but in Eastern mystical poetry, there's a lot about the idea of the divine beloved and the lover, God being the beloved and us being the lover. There's also a number of analogies and metaphors like that used in the Bible, both Jewish and Christian portions. Yeshua talked a lot about the marriage, the divine marriage, and in the sense of us being the bride and God being the groom, kind of a thing. So that's prevalent in there. But before I go into the readings, the other thing I want to mention is that the historically, by most people accept this, the two oldest religions in the world that still exist are Hinduism and Judaism. And some Hindu literature claims that the Jews actually got their stuff from India, and some ancient Jewish literature claims that some of the lost tribes went to India, and the Indians got their stuff from the Jews. So it's kind of a cute little thing about that, but they're very old religions. And in Hinduism, there are primarily in their sacred literature, primarily four paths to God. They have different names in Sanskrit. And they're called yogas because yoga means to uke with or unite with or come into union with. Karma yoga is one, meaning that the way you develop divine union is simply through living, through the cause and effect action of living, and through learning in that process. So there are a number of them, but one is called Bhakti Yoga, and Bhakti Yoga is the yoga of devotion. So that's most similar in nature to the Jewish Christian readings that I'm going to be doing tonight. And if you're not familiar with Bhakti Yoga, there's a lot of wonderful things in it. Yogananda, Paramahansa Yogananda, who started Self-Realization Fellowship, which still exists, he's crossed over. He's a prime example of Bhakti Yoga. There's also in the Gita, Bhagavad Gita, which is an easy thing to buy, come across online, many English translations of it. I'm pretty sure, but it's been a while since I read it, I'm pretty sure it's the 18th discourse that is the path of devotion or Bhakti Yoga. So there's a lot of interesting things there. If you're not familiar with it, you might want to look into. Moving on then to tonight, my first readings are from the Old Testament, the Jewish Bible. There's a book in it that's in English is usually translated as the Song of Solomon. And because he's the author, at least the attributed author of this work. But in Hebrew, it's actually Shir HaShirim, which is the Song of Songs. So in Jewish literature, it's referred to as the Song of Songs. Where in Christian, if you see the Song of Solomon, it's the same thing. And it's an interesting one because it doesn't obviously talk about God. It talks about a romantic relationship between a man and a woman. At various times in both the canonization of the Jewish Bible, before that canon was closed and it was now, this is it, and also the canonization of the Christian Bible before that was closed, there were a number of great teachers, great saints, great spiritual leaders in their day who felt like the Song of Songs should be deleted because it wasn't really about God. It should be taken out. Also the Book of Esther, which wasn't about God. I don't think it even mentions God anywhere, if I remember correctly. Should be taken out too, which is a powerful story. There was a rabbi who lived right after Yeshua. Had Yeshua lived a full lifespan, their lives would have crisscrossed. But since he didn't, so far as we know, they never met. And his name was Rabbi Akiva. He lived in the same areas of Israel that Yeshua lived. In the lifetime of Yeshua's apostles and family, but not in Yeshua's lifetime because he died so young. And Rabbi Akiva became, by many accounts, one of the greatest rabbis ever in Judaism. He also standardized much of what became traditional rabbinic Judaism after the temple was destroyed, consolidated a lot of teachings from various teachers and schools into kind of a halakha, into kind of an accepted way of doing things to be Jewish that is largely what rabbinical Judaism still follows. He made lots of commentaries on Torah. There are lots of practices in Judaism that Rabbi Akiva started. Actually, there are some that Yeshua, I think, started too, although I can't prove it. And you might be able to prove me wrong, but from what I've just seen in a non-scholarly study, there's something now that's called Haftorah, and when you read the various sections of Torah weekly, there's also an Aramaic commentary on them from the prophets or the wisdom writings. And so far as I know, what I've found, the first historical recorded instance of somebody making a commentary and on a scriptural reading after the fact was Yeshua in the temple when he was reading from the scroll in Nazareth. There might be earlier ones. That's the earliest one I found. And then shortly after that, still in first century, and much later in second century AD, became kind of a common practice, and now it's pretty much a standard practice. So anyway, Rabbi Akiva, back to him, said in his opinion you could throw out every book in the Jewish Bible except Song of Songs. That was the most profound and deepest and important book in the Jewish collection. Because from his eyes it was allegorical. It was not about the love of a man and a woman, but a love between the soul and God, and the desperation of the soul trying to find its beloved, which is God, and the yearning of the beloved God for the soul to come into union with the soul, and all that goes on in that process and relationship and trying to find and then hold on to one another. Because at various points in the story, if you haven't read Song of Songs, go read it. At various points they're together and then they're not again, and then they try to find each other again. So, fascinating book. So I'm going to read you the first thing. Is a very short one-liner. It's probably the most quoted line from Song of Songs. It's 6:3. And in English it says, I am my beloved's, and my beloved is mine. That phrase in Hebrew, Ani ledodi vadodi li, is on many Jewish wedding rings written in Hebrew, including this one, actually. I am my beloved's, and my beloved is mine. So again, whether you look at that at the human level of a man and a woman, or you look at that at the divine level of the soul and God, that's a key idea. Now I'm going to go to Deuteronomy, and in Deuteronomy 33:12, it uses the word beloved again. It's the same word. May the beloved of the Lord live securely in him who shields him all day long, and who lives between his shoulders. That's an interesting passage, I think. May the beloved of God, meaning somebody who really loves God, a devotee, if you will, live securely with the one who shields him, meaning the divine again, or God, who shields him all day long and lives between his shoulders. Weird phrase, right? Where is between your shoulders? Right here. This is between your shoulders. Interestingly enough, as a little aside, when I had my heart attack, it did not present in a common way with all the pain here. It presented with all the pain right square between my shoulders. So I can relate to this. Moving on, Psalm 64. May your beloved be rescued. May you save him with your right hand. This is now back to Song of Songs. This is the first chapter, verse 13. My beloved to me is a pouch of myrrh lying all night between my breasts. So again, very sensual if we think of it in a romantic sense. Myrrh, in case you've never smelled it, was a very fragrant spice that was used a great deal in that time. Very lovely, for me anyway, enticing, warm, just I love that fragrance. So here's a pouch of this fragrance now that's kept where? Between the breasts, which is again where? Right here, in the heart. So that's what we're talking about in most of these passages. This is also Song of Songs 7:10. I am my beloved's. That line is repeated a great deal in this work. But the last half of this line is, I am my beloved's, and his desire is for me. So, again, that means something if we're talking about human love. If we're talking about divine love between God and the soul, then God being the beloved, I am my beloved's, meaning I belong to God. And his desire, the beloved's desire, God's desire is for you, is for me. His desire is for me. It is not just that we're seeking God and desiring God. It's also that God is desiring us to come into that intimate relationship that's talked about in the Song of Songs. And then just two short ones from the New Testament. Happen to both be from Matthew. This is Matthew 3:17, where this verse takes place. Is Yeshua is being baptized in the River Jordan by his cousin, literal cousin, John, who became called John the Baptizer or John the Immerser, or in English, John the Baptist. Not to be confused with the Baptist faith. When Jesus is baptized by John in the river, when he's lifted up out of the waters by John, Jesus sees the heavens open and a light come down upon him, and he hears a voice, and the voice says these words to Yeshua, "This is my beloved Son, in whom I'm well pleased." So once again you have this notion of God's profoundly personal, intimate love In this case, you could say, well, maybe it's just limited to Yeshua. I know that not to be the case, but even if that were true, this intimate relationship, this intimate love that God has for Yeshua, that God has for all his children, and that's evidenced in other writings, but that it's a profoundly personal. The idea that God is some impersonal force that doesn't relate to you or care about you or is beyond your life or beyond your interacting in the world or wouldn't lower himself to intercede in human affairs or however you might look at it, that absolutely is not a biblical concept. Absolutely is not. Whether you believe it or not, it's up to you, but it's not a biblical concept. Then the last one, Matthew 12:18. This is my servant whom I have chosen, my beloved in whom my soul delights. So now God delights in the ones he loves. I will pour out my spirit upon him. So now there's this outpouring from God to the lover, to the one God loves. So these kind of passages, and there are many more, indicate to me a very, very dynamic, and very intense, and very deep personal love and affection and connection between man and woman who share that kind of relationship. Spouses hopefully do. Certainly not all do, but hopefully they do. And between God and us, those who love God. So those are the passages from the Bible I wanted to share with you tonight. Now I have another short, little bit longer set of readings that's not from Jewish or Christian literature, it's from Sufi literature. So I will read those to you. And this particular one is from a Sufi named Llewellyn Lee. Not familiar with their work or teachings, but they're translating traditional Sufi passages. Sufi is a mystical practice that really emphasizes deep interconnection and really emphasizes living a life of joy and surrender to the divine. So they talk a great deal actually about this kind of relationship, and use the analogies of the mystical marriage, the divine marriage, the divine beloved and lover, and so on. So there's two different Sufi passages. The mystic is a traveler upon the path of love, a wayfarer journeying back to God through discovering the mysteries of their own heart. The relationship of the mystic to God is that of lover to beloved. This journey takes place within the heart, where one travels deep within themselves into the innermost secret chambers of the heart, where the lover and beloved can share in the ecstasy of union. Through this continuing mystical journey, the wayfarer comes to experience God as an ever-deepening reality of divine love, a love that exists and belongs both to the created and uncreated worlds, both to form and formlessness, time and timelessness. I don't know if that does anything for you, but personally, that's a very meaningful passage to me. This one is the second reading from the Sufi tradition. To love God and to be loved by God. To experience the depth and intimacy of this relationship as we come closer and closer to our beloved within our heart, until at last we are so close, there is no separation between lover and beloved. where the lover now becomes immersed and lost in the love of the beloved. We call it, we meaning Sufis, drowning in the ocean of love. Step by step, we walk along this path of love until at last we are taken by love into the source of love. We are taken by God into God, and there is no going back and no forgetting, only a deepening and a deepening and a deepening and a deepening of this love in the soul. This is the ancient spiritual journey of the soul from separation to union, the journey of our own self back into its perfect oneness with God once more. So, truthfully, I think that's real. I also, from what I can tell of interacting with other people who are spiritually dedicated people, it's not an experience that everybody has had. It's an experience many have had, and everyone can. But many people stop with a mental and or a mental emotional understanding and experience of the divine. As long as they have an experience where they feel enough of the reality of the divine that they can feel a greater sense of peace about their life, where they can feel some healing from all the wounds life has inflicted upon them and that they have inflicted on others, and actually be able to experience real forgiveness of that. They've experienced enough of that divine that they believe in some good form of something happening in the afterlife. Something good will happen, drawing them even closer. They believe these kind of experiences are possible. They hope it's real. They want to know if it's real. They study and read about maybe mystics from the past who've had this experience, maybe even some from the present who do. They would like to be so enraptured in that kind of ecstatic union. Maybe for a moment even they've had just a taste of that. However they've achieved it, whether in deep meditation, whether in moments of great joy, whether in moments of profound human connection, whether in moments of profound connection with nature, they've had some blip where they touched into that or it touched into them, however that works. The connection has been made at that deepest and highest of levels, not just kind of a picking up on the radiance of it and kind of sensing it, not that. Much easier to do, much more prevalent experience. This all-encompassing, all-embracing, all-accepting, absolutely immersion in a boundless love that is not just boundless love, but is boundlessly loving you. It's an extraordinary experience. And there are no saints that I've ever read about in any tradition that have talked about having actually experienced something like this. None that I've ever read that weren't overwhelmed by it, brought to their knees sobbing by it, transformed by it. None that I've read. It's not a, wow, that was a pleasant experience, let me tell you about it. It's not, wow, that was really something, wasn't it? Let me tell you what that was about. It's not that. To give you an example of someone I heard talk about that, it was an author named Richard Bach, who some of you, if you're old enough, may remember from the late 70s, is a very, very popular writer. He started writing in a bestseller book called Jonathan Livingston Seagull. And after that, another bestseller called The Adventures of a Reluctant Messiah. Illusions, The Adventures of a Reluctant Messiah. Profound books, bestseller lists for a long, long time, became very popular and did speaking engagements. And I got to know him and his manager a little bit briefly. And he told at one of his public talks here in Fort Wayne, he told about a dream that he, Richard the writer, had. And in the dream, he, Richard the writer, lived back in ancient Israel during the time of Yeshua. And he, Richard, in that time, in his dream, was a man named Paul. Not the Apostle Paul, not anybody famous Paul, just a Jewish guy named Paul. And he was opposed to Jesus. He'd heard about his teachings. He thought they were heretical. He thought he was a lunatic. He thought he was a heretic. He thought he was misleading people. And mostly he thought he was a phony. He thought he was a charlatan. And he was angered by that. He was angered by this very charismatic charlatan misleading people from the law of Moses and leading them away from God. Very, very disturbed by him. And happened upon Yeshua in the marketplace one day with a crowd of people around him and realized it was Yeshua, this man he'd heard so much about, teaching. And he decided, this is my opportunity. I'm going to confront this man in front of this whole group of these deluded believers of his and call him out and demonstrate what a charlatan he is and clear the cobwebs out of people's head and make it clear to them that he's a big phony. So that was his intent. And with that kind of malice and anger, he pushed his way through the crowd. And he said I was a big man, a fairly big man and strong. And I was much, much stronger and bigger looking than him. And I pushed my way through and got up to him. And I was coming up behind him, and I grabbed him from the shoulder and spun him around. And I was about to lay into him verbally. And he looked in my eyes and said, "Hello, Paul." And he said, I fell down to my knees in uncontrollable sobbing. And I suddenly felt forgiven and like my life made sense. That's the kind of effect Yeshua had on many people. Certainly not everybody, but on many people that came into face-to-face experience with him. So that kind of bhakti, that kind of supreme devotion, that kind of supreme love, that kind of intensely intimate, deep, conscious connection. We don't even have words for this, you know. That's why all the great mystics who've had that experience have such difficulty talking about it. It's not that it's a secret, it's that it's impossible to really convey. Lesser forms of divine connection, and I don't mean less meaningful, I mean just less intense. Lesser forms of connection where we suddenly recognize the reality of something. It's like, oh, there really is a divine. Oh my God, I really am part of that. Oh, we really are connected. Oh, you know, these spiritual teachings really are true. Oh gosh, these ancient masters, they knew what they were talking about. So whatever it is, you know, it's some of these spiritual principles and ideas that we've heard from many different avenues. As we realize the truth of those are spiritual awakenings, and they're profound and they're important, and they do change us. Finding love and peace in us, way beyond all of the upset in us, the distress in us, the fear in us, the doubt in us, the anger in us, way at a much more central core in us than that. When we experience that, that's awesome. That's really profound. And those are wondrous things. Those are stepping stones to, I believe, to this experience that's being talked about in Song of Songs, that's being talked about in some of the Bhakti literature of the East, that's being talked about in some of the Persian poetry, that's being talked about in these intimate, indescribable experiences of union with an intensity of love that we can't hold in the human form. In fact, if you have ever felt that kind of love, or something approaching that kind of love for another human being, hopefully your mate, your spouse, if you've ever felt something even approaching that, or something that could possibly even open into that, at a certain point in that, there's a recognition in your awareness that these very forms, these bodies that we want to get so close to the one we love in that way so much, that we want to be one with, literally become one with, inside one another, become merged together, joined together, that at that level, the body itself actually becomes an impediment to that. You can't get close enough in the body. You can just try to. But the spirit in you, the soul of you can. There can actually be a merging of souls. That sounds like metaphor, but it actually can be. And that's what I believe was talked about in the Bible in terms of the two becoming one and not being able to be torn asunder again. There is something very deep that happens. The Baal Shem Tov, who I talked about before, some of you may be familiar with him from me or elsewhere. If you're not, he was a very, very great Jewish mystical rabbi in the late 1700s in Eastern Europe. One of the things, I will not say it eloquently like he did, but one of the things that's retained of what he taught is that he said when two souls really come together and their spirits really entwine, when they die, their two souls begin to spiral together and become one and return back to God as one. Now, I can't speak to whether that's actually so or not. I love the idea, but he said that was not. He was not trying to be figurative or give a nice metaphor. He was saying this is actually what can happen. So there is what I'm trying to get at is that whatever level or layer of awakening we have, whatever layer of understanding we have, however much we've actually actualized and embodied that spirit in how we think, how we speak, how we act. And most of us, definitely me, probably you too, fall short of that. Our speech, our actions, and our choices fall short of fully embodying even what we know, to whatever depth that is. But however much we successfully demonstrate that, there's more. And I think that's what some of these writers are trying to get at, is the reality of how intensely personal God loves us is inconceivable to our minds. Inconceivable. But thank God, but is tangible to our souls. It can experience that. And that's what the mystical journey, in most writings, if you study them at enough of a core level, whether it's Sufism or Kabbalah or mystical Christianity or any of the various devotional yogas, at their core, that is, I believe, what they're all trying to convey and get to and say, these practices, this path, this way of living, this is where this goes. This is where this goes. Don't give up. Don't give up. Keep going. And I have experienced enough of that I know that that's what they're talking about is real, even though I haven't experienced it to some of their depths, and even though I can't hold it. So we move toward that. And it's a good thing to be comfortable with ourselves. It's a good thing to be comfortable with the understanding we have grown into. It's a good thing to be appreciative of the knowing that we have been given. And the more we use it, the more we will be given. That's all a really good thing. What is not a helpful thing is to reach some point where we get so comfortable and complacent with that level of awareness that we then just stop and go, well, this is it. I've kind of reached it. I'm the ultimate now. I've got it. I got it all. I know it's in me. It's all there. I have access to all of it. All that part's true. It is all there. You do have access to it. The part that's not true is that you've got it all, and that you can hold it all, and that you can be it all the time. That sense of I've arrived and you haven't, but I'll kindly show you how to get to the highest summit which I'm now comfortably sitting at. That's not a helpful attitude because it's not real. Only the real is helpful in the long run. Our illusions may be comforting, and they certainly are, and our illusions may be inspiring, and our illusions may justify ourselves in our actions, but in the long run, only the real is of any actual help. So, few ideas to go into meditation with, and the last piece, I guess, is I think this also relates to Yeshua talking about you can't fully enter the kingdom unless you do so as a child. Because when a child is really fully loved, forgiven, accepted, and knows that, they have no shame in being overwhelmed by it, no shame in hugging, no shame in tears, no shame in dancing around with wild abandon. They're just overwhelmed by the love. And until we're humble enough to receive it like that, without wondering how we look, without worrying that we might sound funny or people may laugh at us behind our back because we're so overwhelmed. There was a rabbi in Jewish tradition, I'm pretty sure it was Zusha. Later, Nahama and Shuli can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it was Zusha, that in certain passages, when it was the Torah reading, and in the beginning, when it's the Torah portion of Genesis where it says, and God spoke and said, let there be light, and there was light, and God spoke and said, when that happens, he would be reading that, and he would get to the and God spoke, and would just be so overwhelmed, and his heart so full that he was just in tears and couldn't actually finish the reading ever. And from year to year, he never got through it. Because he was experiencing God speaking to him, which is, again, we get echoes of all that, which are powerful enough in themselves. But I think the fullness of what's being talked about in some of these traditions, some of these mystical writings, is a fullness we're all heading toward and all have hopefully tasted and hopefully won't stop because there's so much more. So with that, let's go into the quiet together. Let's bring our attention to that innermost secret chamber, as the Sufi passage said. Whether you find that in this upper room in the temple of the soul, the upper part of the head, or deep in the center of the head as a reference point, whether you feel it primarily somewhere else, whether you feel it above you, within your heart, wherever you feel it. It is the essence that matters, not the location. where you can most readily connect to that essence in you. And at that place is where all of the things that I've been sharing, where all of that is opened in you, where there is a doorway for you to step into those kind of experiences in higher and higher and deeper ways. To open to it requires just a few simple things, requires being present with your attention. It requires a genuine, humble willingness to receive. And it requires a longing to give your love and receive love back. And that's about it. If you sit with those three things and anything else that you may find useful to you, that door will progressively open and that connection will deepen and strengthen and deepen and strengthen. And you will become increasingly aware of it. So we just sit in that space, willing and longing and asking to know God's love for us. Let's just slowly begin to bring our attention back once more. So, one of the things that most of these kind of mystical teachings talk about is that the idea of bride and groom or husband and wife, the idea that the bonds of matrimony, if we don't talk that way much anymore these days in many parts of our culture, but that at the human level, that the institution of marriage is a spiritual training ground so that the soul can develop the ability to have this kind of relationship with its creator. And that in the kind of marriages that were being talked about in the mystical poetry and the mystical teachings of these different religions, that kind of marriage, and certainly not all marriages are like that, but that kind of marriage, the idea was that you learn to become more God-like and to be able to give your love more freely. Typically, human beings give love conditionally and a little bit at a time. I'll give you this much, I'll let you in this far, and if you don't damage me too bad there, maybe I'll give you a little more and let you in a little further. But it's rare to give the whole self to another these days, I think. It seems to be. And part of the idea of the marriage is that, like God, when your partner makes stupid mistakes, you don't walk away from the marriage. When your partner does or says something that hurts your feelings, you don't stop loving them. You don't stop believing in them. You don't refuse to give them another chance. When you make mistakes, to do that to your partner, and you feel like giving up, they still believe in you. There's this mutual, unending connection, forgiveness, and acceptance that helps us to begin to open up to receive that from the divine, to experience that with the divine, and to become more like a child of that divine. And also in these kind of marriages, there's a commitment. It's like, it's not, I'll love you and be with you and have a life with you until I don't like you, until you're uncomfortable, until I find something better, until I get tired of you, until you get tired of me, until we annoy each other, and then we'll go our separate ways. This is it. This is it. This is the relationship. This is it from now on. And whatever it takes to sustain it, I'm going to do that. And however difficult it is for me to do it, that's what I'm going to do my best to do. And even when I fail, I'm going to continue to do my best to do it. And when he or she fails, when the partner fails, same thing. People who can create and sustain that kind of a marriage, which will be imperfect, but people who can do that are going to experience and have a much greater reference point in them for the reality of God's love for our soul when literature like this talks about it in those terms. So this is a song I'd like to share with you tonight. There are no words with which to say all the things I feel today, and so I try to show you all you mean to me. Day by day I start to speak, but then your eyes smile back at me, and I grow weak. What would I do without you? Who would keep me strong and true? How could I live even a while without your voice, your touch, your smile, sharing our home, sharing our faith, learning to trust after mistakes. When I want to shout, she's my whole life. All that comes out is she's my wife. There is no song, no poem, no gift, no human heart can hold all this, but I do, whenever I see you. So, for those who don't have a human spouse in their life with a relationship like this, or that yearns for something like this, then it means your opportunity is to do your best to develop this kind of connection, this kind of caring, this kind of commitment with people who are important to you in your life, whether they're your children, your friends, your neighbors, your relatives, whoever it may be, that you endeavor to find that deep place in you, to connect with that deep place in them, to reveal yourself to them without the masks and protection, to be willing to receive them in that same light, and to hold for one another a space of this loving intimacy that may not be romantic or sexual or anything along those lines if you don't have a spouse, but will be a profound, deeply, unshakably caring, loving connection with another soul. And honestly, some of us find it easier to relate to pets that way in the beginning because humans have hurt us so much. So we have a beloved cat or a beloved dog or even a horse or a parrot or whatever it may be. And we learn through that dynamic of what this kind of love that exceeds our own capacities, love that transcends our ability to imagine its boundlessness. We have a sense of that. We develop it with the commitment we have to our pet and their commitment to us. Can cats make commitments like that? No, that's just a dog guy comment. I know they can, but so some people find it easier to relate to the animal kingdom or the nature kingdom to begin to open at this deeper level because they feel safer there. But wherever you start, keep moving, because opening to that is what our soul is longing for, and in my opinion, what it was created for. Because to engage in an intimate relationship with the divine at the kind of level we're talking about here requires an awareness and a willingness. The love that God seeks to have with us, already that love is being given to us, but the love God is longing for is the love we want to give back, not out of fear, not out of coercion, not out of hoping to get something from it, not out of hoping to manipulate God into making life work the way we want, but because we really just love God and just want to be with Him. That's what God's longing for. So all of these other training grounds, whether it's pets, friends, relatives, spouses, children, they're all opportunities to move to whatever depth we can into the reality of what that sort of relationship is like. And that's what the great souls have tried to tell us is the relationship God feels toward us and wants with us. So thank you for joining me tonight. I hope some of you can join Michael and I tomorrow, 10 o'clock at Unity. We'd love to see you there. And I know some of you have been struggling with some illness and things like that too, or maybe good friends or family members have. There's a lot of that stuff out there. So may your healing come quickly and completely and easily. May this be a good week for all of us in terms of health and prosperity, and most importantly, perhaps of finding that love that brings with it the peace that we seek. So thank you all for being with me tonight. I really appreciate it. I'm going to pause the recording and then close out the meeting for tonight. Thank you all. Hope to see you some this weekend and the rest of the next week here. Love you.